Hello and welcome to another Destiny Council deck tech video. Today we're going to be looking at Emperor Palpatine, the Galactic Emperor. Very fun character, and obviously he's the only character in the game right now who runs as a solo elite character at 28 points. So yeah, there's not much to talk about here as far as characters go. The main reason why you run Palpatine is because he has 15 health and does a ton of damage. And basically, because all of your health is on one character, you never lose dice from deaths throughout the game, so you can't lose dice value or resource value in the character cards and in any upgrades that you play throughout the game. As far as which battlefields we choose to play with, there are several different options. Oto Gunga is played by a lot of players. It's kind of just a safe, you get a heal, add health throughout the game. Try to outlast your opponent, so that's an option. Moisture Farm is an interesting choice. It's very dangerous because every deck can make use of resources, especially something like Sabine Ezra, who has a chance of going faster than you. But at the same time, Palpatine being only one character, and if you run force feeds, he can be very quick, so you can make use of this one resource to potentially gain enough resources to rise again earlier on in the game than you normally would, potentially offsetting the shields. So I like Moisture Farm for that reason. And then also Cargo Hold. Cargo Hold is an interesting battlefield, allowing you to move upgrades that can mitigate any upgrade dice, and can never be used against you. There are a couple really strong uses of it in this meta. One of them is being able to move defensive upgrades off of characters. So if they drop a Force Illusion on that Qui-Gon at the end of a turn, you can claim and move that Force Illusion over to Kanan and kill the Qui-Gon next turn. Same thing goes for the second chance in Sabine Ezra, being able to move the second chance to the Ezra, and then unless they draw their other second chance, you're going to be able to kill the Sabine next turn. And as I said, it can't be used against you, so I think of all the options, I think Cargo Hold is still potentially the strongest. It can mitigate every single turn, and it can also, well, as long as they have upgrade dice, and it can also never hurt you. So we'll move this over. And a lot of characters actually, or a lot of players are really scared of Cargo Hold, so they'll give you shields at the start. So we'll move those over here. So we're going to start with the upgrade suite. So obviously we're going to be playing Holocron. It's a no-brainer. The only reason why you would consider not running it is if everyone ran Rend in all of their decks. But even then, the potential to gain a 4-cost upgrade for basically free, one if you're paying to roll that die in immediately, is really powerful. And even just being able to get a free die to help with cards like Negotiate, DL44, and other effects that make you choose and remove dice, it can be really helpful. The upgrades that we're going to run with it are Force Lightning. I think this is a must include. You can run other upgrades, other abilities, but this is by far the best one that you can have, and it's the one that you must have in your deck. I don't run a ton of ability upgrades because ultimately it's worse to have a ton of abilities in your hand but no Holocron than it is to have a Holocron and no abilities in your hand. So I found that when you're playing Palpatine and you run too many ability upgrades, sure, it's great on the games where you draw Holocron, but it's terrible otherwise. So yeah, I'd say you could run 2 Force Lightnings and not much else. But it's up to you ultimately. And then finally, we have Force Speeds. So Force Speeds, some people don't like them in Palpatine, but what I find, I mean, if you're only using them to special, discard, reroll, and then resolve dice, they're not very useful because it's complete luck as to whether you get any value out of the Force Speed special. What they should be used for is for gaining speed to make sure you can always claim. Rolling out first is important in a meta with Qui-Gon Kanan, where a lot of the removal requires dice in the pool. Claim effects are usually strong anyways, so you want to be making use of them as much as you can. And Force Speed allows you to play faster, basically. So you should be using Force Speeds to keep ahead of your opponents. You can do things like if you have an Indomitable in your hand, or a 2 shields showing on Palpatine, but you're already at the 3 shield count, you can wait for your opponent to deal damage at the end of the turn, and then Force Speed, play that Indomitable, and then claim. But yeah, basically Force Speed helps you go faster and enables you to claim more, which is a huge benefit. And just like Holocron, it's a 0-cost drop that can help the early Negotiate and DL44 plays and prevent them from removing your Palp dice. So we'll move these over here. So what are the optional upgrades that you can play? Well, we'll talk about Force Powers first. Mind Probe is obviously a very good force power. If you are going faster as a Palpatine, which you often will, then the special is going to be really powerful when you first roll out. They'll still be at 5 cards. They get an option to play 1 or maybe remove the die. So yeah, it's a very good option. So is Force Push. Force Push, while being weaker, still has the 2 discard side, which can be powerful. Still has 2/2 range sides, which are really useful if you're running No Mercy, for being able to No Mercy off the die. Mind Probe kind of suffers from not being able to No Mercy and not being very good at the end of the turn, whereas Force Push will still deal damage at the end of the turn if you can roll one of those 2s. So ultimately, Mind Probe has, I'd say, higher damage potential. Force Push has a little bit more utility defensively and is much better for the finishing play of No Mercy. That can be unexpected. Beyond that, you also have a couple of cheaper drops that you can play in addition to your Force Speeds and Holocrons, such as a Dark Council. The special side is obviously amazing because you keep the dice anyways, and drawing cards is good. And then the 2 focus sides are great for focusing into the 3s. If you have both a Force Speed and a Dark Council, obviously when you're showing that special and a focus side, you're able to force your opponent to spend removal before you have good dice showing, and it will get around reroll effects like Sound the Alarm. So it's really good upgrade, and obviously it has that its other side is a resource, which is great. Good card. You also have the option of Temptation. Temptation is really insane if you're running No Mercy. Basically, it has 2 specials that say draw 2, because your opponent will never want to give you 2 resources, because if they do, you're going to be able to rise again insanely fast. So the special side is either 2 resources or 2 cards, and 2 cards are insane for Palpatine, depending upon your build, what you're running. And as I said, for No Mercy, you can potentially have turns where you can No Mercy for 7 if you Temptation special into Force Feed special into No Mercy. Things like that. So yeah, these are some options I would consider. So what are the core events in Palpatine? Well, I'm going to start with the defensive events, and oddly enough, I'm going to start with Force Illusion, which is obviously not an event, but I'm going to put in this category because it's defensive. Force Illusion is insanely good at blocking high amounts of damage for cheap, and its only downside is that you mill yourself, which doesn't matter because Palpatine games are really fast because of how high damage he is. So Force Illusion is a definite must include. Indomitable is an insane card. Paying 1 resource for 3 shields is really good. It doesn't have the downside of Dug In, which is you don't have to control the battlefield, and its only downside is completely negated when you are Palpatine. So Indomitable is a great and must-play card. The only time I would consider not playing it is if you just find there's way too much shield hate in the meta. But even so, it can be great. I'd also highly recommend you run 2 Feel Your Angers at this point. There are so many high dice count decks in Qui-Gon Kanan, which can swarm with 2 drops, 5 dice Villain, which swarms with 2 drops, such that unless you have Feel Your Anger and get off a crazy Feel Your Anger, you're gonna have issues with dealing with high dice counts as far as your removal goes. Along that lines, Overconfidence is, I'd say, a must include right now over even Isolation, just because of how many dice there are. When 5-die Villain is re-rolling at the end of the turn and trying to get exactly what they need, Overconfidence can negate 2 dice, potentially, especially if they're out of cards, forcing them to maybe Night Sister reroll. So yeah, just being able to at least remove 1 dice and soft control another dice, potentially, is really valuable in this high dice count meta. And then finally, the last defensive card is Rise Again, which is in some ways an offensive card because it's meant to give you an upgrade for free. You're going to be rising again your Force Lightning if you have it. Sometimes you should keep in mind that you can rise again Force Illusions, which can just be a huge swing when your Palpatine's sitting at 11 damage, 4 health from dying. You can rise again, get him back to 6 health, and put out a Force Illusion, and now he's effectively almost full health. It can be crazy. So yes, keep in mind that Rise Again, a Force Illusion, is a great comeback play, especially if you've already holocroned into Force Lightning. So yeah, these are our defensive cards of choice that are core to the deck. Keep in mind that Isolation is an optional core card here, depending upon the meta, but I feel like right now Overconfidence fills that slot better because of the high dice counts, as I said. So, what are the aggro cards that you want to run? Well, the first and most obvious no-brainer right now is Endurance. Great card. The rule of thumb is typically 1 resource for 2 damage. Endurance, being able to roll back in a Palpatine die, will always deal at least 2 damage from the Palpatine trigger, but then potentially can deal 3 more with the 3 side, 2 more, or a 2 more HP swing with shields or the 2 ranged. And even taking a resource means you essentially got 2 damage for free. So Endurance is super above the curve with Palpatine and is a no-brainer. Intimidate is a must-play right now because of how many shields are in the meta. If the meta changes enough, you may want to just stop playing it, but for now I think it's a must-include. And finally, here's a card that not everyone runs, but I think it is a must-include in Palpatine, and that is No Mercy, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. So No Mercy is extremely weak at times because it forces you to chuck your whole hand to be able to deal its extra damage, which is really, really inefficient, and can leave you open to a deck like 5 Dice Villain, where if you No Mercy to kill their Balatique or something, they could just take those redeploys, roll out Sienna, and slaughter you while you have no removal in your hand. However, Palpatine deals split damage when he's resolving 2s, and then the 2 damage is always spread out. The shields when he resolves them, the discards, the resources, always get split. So you have issues with finishing off a single opponent character. And if you can't finish off a character, you won't be able to remove any character or upgrade dice throughout the game until the very end. No Mercy solves this issue by being able to push a lot of single target damage. And it's really good against a lot of the blue hero decks right now, being R2-P2 and Qui-Gon Canon, because they like to Shoto up, and they'll keep their upgrades on the character you're focusing. They won't overwrite with redeploys, because they want to keep that Shoto value, but then when they're sitting at 6 damage away, you can instantly kill that character while removing 4 resources worth in upgrades. So I think No Mercy is just a must-include in Palp, but feel free to disagree. Let me know in the comments if you do. We'll go ahead and move these to the side. And now we are going to talk about a long and lengthy list of potential events that you can play. So, first off, in optional events, we have the aggressive events suite of Swiftness. So Swiftness was extremely powerful pre-errata, the Swiftness build of Palpatine, together with aim and use the Force. The reason for it was you basically had to rush decks. You had to play the race to do as much damage as you can as quickly as possible. Swiftness with aim and use the Force together with your Force speeds was able to guarantee 3 sides and help you race a deck. It was especially necessary because shields weren't as good. Neither were resources. It was harder to get up to the 5 resource count and rise again. Games didn't last as long, so resources weren't quite as much value. So resource side on Palpatine was weaker, and the shield side on Palpatine was much weaker because any Fiber Knife deck would just completely ignore your shields. So you wouldn't really want to resolve any of your sides except for your ranged sides. Now that shields are better, these cards aren't as necessary, but they're still a viable option for being aggressive. I like to run 2 Swiftness, 1 aim, and 2 use the Force. Combined with the Force speed, it's just a lot of unexpected damage for your opponent, and you're also able to, on turn 3, on turn 4, roll out and know that no matter what happens, unless they remove both dice with something like a best defense, you're going to be able to Swiftness aim and kill a character. And that's just a great feeling to not care what you roll out. But at the same time, it's kind of resource inefficient at times, so you can choose to ignore that now with how good the resource and shield sides are in this current meta. And I'm going to go ahead and throw in Trust Your Instincts into this block of cards because you can Swiftness Trust Your Instincts for the instant reroll into resolving dice. And Trust Your Instincts is just a solid aggressive card in that you get rerolls, and it's also solid defensively, and that you get to draw potentially more removal. But Trust Your Instincts is pretty big with No Mercy because you keep your blue card count when you're trying to reroll into that ranged damage. We'll go ahead and remove this. Another aggressive card that you can potentially play is Unyielding. I have never tried this, but theoretically, what it does is you pay 1 resource, resolve any number of your blue dice, showing damage, ranged or melee, in the order of your choice, treating this damage as unblockable. The main advantage of this is that with the number of Force Illusions and shields in the meta, when a character is down to 3 health, you could pay 1 to essentially bypass a fully shielded and Force Illusion to Qui-Gon. Potentially a great finisher that would be very unexpected. Now we're going to talk about some of the defensive options that you have that are not necessarily must-includes. So first off, we have Isolation. I don't think it's a must include right now because of how many cheap dice there are in the game on the characters and a lot of the top decks. Poe and Rey don't have the best dice. Poe's dice are great, but Rey's aren't. Kanan and Qui-Gon have mediocre dice. They do a lot, but they're not like... You're going to be paying 1 to save 2 damage and never more against those decks. Same against 5-die villain. The only deck that Isolation is really great against right now is Palpatine and Sabine Ezra. But at the same time, any Sabine dice that roll well are going to be instantly resolved. So Isolation is just not as good right now as, I think, Overconfidence. Also, we'll go ahead and talk about Deflect. Deflect is a very, very, very good card, but if you're seeing too much Qui-Gon Kanan and too many melee-focused decks, including like Kylo Vader, then maybe you aren't running Deflect right now. But I think it's a very solid, at least as a one of. High Ground is a definite option because it can hit... It's like a Deflect that doesn't have the upside of potentially dealing 2 damage, but it can also be used on melee, and it's very good with Palp because you are so fast. However, obviously it does have that significant drawback of only being able to play when you have control of your battlefield. But as I said, with Force Speeds, you can keep control of that, so it's a good option. And then finally, we have It Will All Be Mine, perhaps the most blowout removal card in the game right now. Potentially being able to take that 3 blank roll of Qui-Gon Kanan and turning it into 7 damage back into their face is extremely powerful. However, it takes 3 resources, so you're basically not going to be able to rise again anytime soon if you play that card. But it is an option as a good one of, potentially. Another card that is kind of defensive and kind of aggressive, but I'd say primarily aggressive, is Abandon All Hope. So the point of this is to remove all of your opponent's resources. They're almost never going to choose to discard their entire hand. Remove all of the resources so that when you roll out, it's harder for them to control your Palpatine dice. Now, I say it's defensive in a sense because if there are any sort of Crime Lord decks running on in the meta, you have to run 2 of these so that you can hit them with it and remove those 5 resources that they need for Crime Lord, or hit the Ace and the Hollow Crime Lord from their hand if they're not willing to get rid of their resources. So a must include if Crime Lord is in the meta, but it's also aggressive in that you get rid of their resources for control. I'd say right now it's kind of weaker because of how many good zero-cost removal cards there are. Specifically, blue hero decks are going to be running Guard, and Guard is just not affected by it at all. There are also a lot of Sounding Alarms, which, while not great against Palpatine, they're still zero cost. So essentially, there are lots of options that people are running that ignore Abandon All Hope's benefit. But at the same time, it can help you not get deflected when you roll out. These next set of cards are control cards. Well, not exactly. We have the Enrage, which obviously gives a resource, the Control of Rejuvenate, which just heals a single health, and the Control of Anger, which combined with their upgrades of Holocron and Dark Council and Temptation can often be useful. However, you have very few character dice, so Anger isn't going to go off very often. But the point of these 3 and why I bring them up is that if you really want to focus on an early Rise Again, these are some good zero-cost removal options, which, while weaker, will not drain your resource pool. And Enrage, which helps you get up to that 5 resources, just that 1 resource earlier. I don't like these, but if you really like to focus on the early Rise Again, these are some options. And then the final cards that we're going to talk about is if you are concerned about Kylo decks and how to beat them, here is a Gray Suite that you can potentially run. No Survivors is a good aggro card. It deals 1 damage to each of the opponent's damaged characters, which right now is usually 2. There are a lot of 2-character decks, but paying 1 for 2 isn't bad. And against 5-die villain, it's paying 1 for 3 because your splash is going to hit multiple characters. They're always going to be pinging their Night Sister, and they'll most likely be splashing onto Sienna. So it's a good option that's sometimes over the curve. Sound the Alarm obviously can be powerful when Sabine tries to die fix. If she didn't use that running interference, you can prevent all of that damage potentially. It's also extremely good against 5-die villain because of how many rerolls they need to get to their damage sides. Doubt is a card that lots of Palp players run, and I think is a good option. The reason why I say it's not absolutely necessary is because, keep in mind, I think that No Mercy is necessary. So if you're running No Mercy, the number of gray cards that you have is limited But that being said, Doubt is a great removal option for Palpatine that lets him save resources, save for that Rise Again. And if you're especially concerned about Kylo, then Doubt is a no-brainer. And then we have Take Cover, which, while only being a single resource swing, is important for just adding great cards to your deck. So between Swiftness, Aim, and these events here, you can definitely build a deck that won't be nearly as weak to Kylo. It won't be as efficient against other decks, but I just want to throw it out there as an option. So tell me, what do you think of our Palpatine deck tech? Did we miss any cards? I'm certainly not infallible. Let us know. Yeah, I'd say Palpatine is in an interesting spot in the meta right now. He can have some great matchups into certain decks, but also has some terrible matchups against things like 5-die Villain, where it's really hard to control all of their dice. They run a ton of control, and your splash damage is split amongst 3 characters. The reason why I don't like Palpatine as far as a deck to take to regionals is that while he is a very consistent character, when he's in a bad matchup, there's almost nothing you can do. Some decks' bad matchups are just bad. Palpatine's bad matchups are terrible, especially if you ever run into, in the early rounds, something like a Jabba Unkar. Anything running Crime Lord, he's just doomed. So I would say be careful about bringing this to regionals, but if you play a lot of it and you're comfortable with it, it's a very consistent deck. It's hard to miss with Palpatine's dice, especially if you're running the Swiftness, Aim, use the Force suite. You just simply won't miss. So very consistent, but definitely has its weaknesses. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and feel free to like and subscribe. Until next time.